Welcome to the very first episode of the Ask Mrs. HR podcast. My name is Dr. Thelá Thatch, and I have an alter ego named Mrs. HR. Mrs. HR has been around for almost 25 years, and I got that name because people would see me in the hallway and they say, "Hey, here comes Mrs. HR." So this podcast is designed to answer human resource questions, business questions, questions that you may have about your work life and outside your work life from an honest point of view using all of my human resources experience. And I look forward to spending time with you in the Ask Mrs. HR podcast. I am not an attorney, so anything I talk about on the Ask Mrs. HR podcast is strictly based on my HR certifications and my years of HR experience. So with that said, when I think about Sean P. Diddy, Puff Diddy Combs, he goes by numerous names. It seems the very first thing he is facing is trying to prove his innocence. And so whether he was a big celebrity like Sean P. Diddy Combs is, or just, your average everyday worker. The number one thing that happens when someone files a complaint against you is trying to prove that that complaint is not true. And the best way that you can do that is to make sure you have your documents in a row, make sure you have all of your documents in order, make sure you have witnesses. And number one, in my experience, make sure you have a record, a pattern, a history of being a person of integrity. So there's certain things that, although you may have documents, you may have policies, your reputation carries a lot of weight. And so if you have a pattern of having free golfs, or if you have a pattern of touching people you're not supposed to be touching, or you have a pattern of even, I talk about this in the workplace, using foul language, like dropping the F-bombs and calling people B-word, that will all come back to haunt you when you have a complaint against you. So it is really important when you're in the workplace. I'm not saying be super corporate like I can be sometimes, but, show up being your best. We talk about human resources. We talk about bringing your very best self to work. And so when I look at this P. Diddy case, how is he showing up? Now, the sad thing is we saw him show up on some of these reality shows, and this is what we're talking about now, the way he treated, people during Making the Band and working for Diddy and all these different shows. He pretty much showed that he has a pattern of being tough on people, talking to people in a disrespectful way, that he's about, doing anything to make money. So he's created over these years a pattern of behavior and a reputation that will not help his case in a court of law. So when you're thinking about how do I protect myself from someone making a claim against me, how are you running your business? How are you showing up every day? What are you saying to people? What would people say about you when you're not in the room? Do you use your power to abuse other people, what we call abuse of power? Are you putting documents in place that protect you and policies in place that protect you? And then not only that, are you following your own policies? So some of the things that P. Diddy is facing right now is losing his seat. He's already lost his seat as CEO on one company, or he stepped down, or whatever. I'm not there. I wasn't there when it happened. But he's probably going to be losing his seat either on boards, his CEO status, his shares in the company. There's a lot at risk on top of the multiple millions and millions of dollars of funds that he's going to lose. He's going to lose so much money when people come out and sue him, and he sued, lawyers and legal fees. So there's a lot at risk. But let me tell you, there's not just a lot at risk for someone like P. Diddy, who's a celebrity. There's a lot at risk for you as an employee, as an employer. If you do the same things that he's done or is allegedly has done, or if you are, if someone files a harassment claim against you and you're found to be guilty of that harassment claim, you can also lose everything. So I know this first episode is a little intense because it's scary, because If people accuse you of sexual harassment, hostile work environment, according to the law, not only you can be held responsible, but everybody involved can be held responsible. So now we're looking at P. Diddy's chief of staff, his assistant. What did they do to allegedly encourage or support this harassing behavior? So that's some of the things we're going to talk about on the Ask Mrs. HR podcast. How can you set yourself up to win in your business so you can keep your business? So a hostile work environment is covered under the law. So that's a term that's used by lawyers. It's used in court, and you are protected under the law under different sexual harassment laws. And so what a hostile environment looks like is hostile behavior or bad behavior, I put in quotes, bad behavior that is persistent and is a pattern of constant behavior that disrupts how you show up in the workplace. It affects how you are able to do your work because you feel either afraid, bullied, basically you feel unsafe. So it could look like, I remember I worked at one company and I was a victim of hostile work environment, and the person, I didn't know at the time, but the person was harassing numerous people within the organization, mostly women. And what he would do to me, which was different than what he would do to other people, is every day he would come to my desk, stand behind my chair and shake my chair, looking over me and like shaking my chair. So the first time he did it, I just thought, he was standing behind me shaking my chair. It seemed really simple, but he was also a supervisor. So I was very hesitant with how I responded to him. The second time he did it, I told him, his name, I'll just say John Doe. I'm like, John, will you please stop shaking my chair? Now, once I mentioned that to him, he still continued to do it. No matter how many times I told him to stop touching my chair, touching my shoulder, which was near my chair, he continued to do it. So it got to a place where I would feel very uncomfortable around him. And when I would approach him and tell him not to do it, he would, make me feel like I was losing my mind, make me feel like I was making things up. He would curse at me. And so he was creating a hostile work environment. Because he created a place where I couldn't even come sit in my chair without being harassed by him. So eventually, I think that once I reported it, he literally was fired like the next day, because it turned out I was just one of many people he was doing that to. So that's just one example. It can look different for different people. That was my example. Coming into a workplace, and I'm always very concerned when I'm working with clients and leaders, just curse people out when they do things wrong, like, what the F are you doing over here? I told you to do, they're just talking to people like they're at home, like how they might talk to their dog at home or their children at home. Some people curse their children out, but creating this environment where you just don't feel safe and you have no recourse to do anything about it. When you try to do something about it, nothing gets done, nothing changes. And that's what a hostile work environment looks like.
So the thing about a hostile environment these days, with this, everybody's hypersensitive now.
Oh, is that so?
So hostile, I mean, it's easily to create a hostile environment. Like if you call somebody the wrong pronoun, you have just created a hostile environment.
I hear that all the time. And again, working for 25 years in human resources, I agree, but I also disagree. I don't think anything has really changed. I think, the part of our culture right now, there's like this attack um, on being woke or being politically correct. And we know where some of that is coming from. And I think being politically correct isn't really the word that we want to use, or even being hypersensitive. I think the word that we should be really concerned with, and I hope this is where I want everybody to listen, it's respect. It's respect, because at any given time, I might say something that offends you. That doesn't mean I'm hypersensitive or you're hypersensitive or I'm hypersensitive. It just means I need to lean in and listen. And I just think over the course of time, that's been kind of twisted because the reality is we've always needed to lean in and listen, and we still need to lean in and listen. So if I call you the wrong pronoun, and I've called people lots of wrong things and lots of wrong pronouns, I have never, ever, ever been threatened with a lawsuit because I called someone the wrong pronoun. Why? Because they're like, oh, I want to be called a cat today. And that's a true story. Oh, my name is Cat. And I identify as a cat. And then I'm like, okay, tell me more. Not get about my face, cat. I'm not going to call you cat. And that's where we have a problem when we disagree with how people want to identify. We're seeing this right now in our, politics and in our world where someone is identifying as Black, and then you have someone telling them you're not Black. You can't tell someone how they identify. I might identify as a giraffe right now. If I say I'm a giraffe, they say, okay, giraffe, why do you think you're a giraffe? This is really what is important in the workplace. It's not about being hypersensitive or being, super touchy. It's about respect. Just, okay, I disagree with you. You are definitely not a cat nor a giraffe. And I think you're from Africa and not from whatever. But if respect me enough to just respect how I identify. If we could get to that place, we would have a lot less issues in the workplace. But this is the same conversations we've been having in human resources since the beginning of human resources. There's really nothing new. And like all of my employee relations issues that I've dealt with over these 25 years is the core is people not respecting how people show up. And I'm going to use another example. We might say, I just had a baby and I need 2 days off. I've had managers come to me and say, nobody told you to have a baby. It's not my fault you had a baby. So you're not, why does she even have a baby? And I want to look for a new employee because I need someone who doesn't have a baby. So instead of saying, wow, amazing, congratulations, you had a baby. How can we work with you? How can we accommodate you? And you're going to hear that a lot on this podcast because what we want to keep in the law and what the law has right now is this practice of accommodations. How can I accommodate you? And there's a reason why we have accommodations around birth, around disability, around time off. There's a ton of accommodations that we'll get into later on the podcast. But why do we have accommodations? Why do we need respect in the workplace? Because rights in the workplace have been violated so much and so egregiously. We all need to stop, listen, take a step back, and make sure we're respecting one another in the workplace. I feel really strongly about this point. You will hear me go off a little bit because we really, as a diversity, equity, and inclusion person, I am a chief equity officer. Equity and equality, two separate things. We'll talk about that. But in order to maintain equity, we have to make sure we understand where that person is coming from and respect where they're coming from. It's not for me to judge if you are Black, if you are a cat, if you are bisexual, homosexual, pansexual. That's your business. What I need to be concerned about in the workplace is how does this affect productivity? How does this affect your job? Do you need an accommodation? Now, by law, you have to have sexual harassment trainings twice a year in California if you're a manager or a supervisor. That is the law. Why is it the law? Anytime something's a law in this country, it's because it's been abused. So it's the law because people were not respecting women and other people in the workplace. So yes, as a part of the law, especially is Title VII of the Civil Rights Act of 1990, where there was an amendment to the law that says the employer holds the burden of proof. And so if someone says, I was harassed or I have a hostile work environment, and I say it's because of, P. Diddy Enterprises or my employer, now P. Diddy Enterprises or that employer has to prove that I'm wrong. It's not up to me. So when the law was first created in 1964, I had to prove it myself. So it was me up against a P. Diddy enterprise. So me up against a large organization trying to prove that, yeah, I was harassed, just little old me. Now the law says, employer, she's saying she's harassed. Now you have to prove it. That was a big shift in the law in 1991, I believe. And could you imagine trying to prove to your employer that you were harassed and they have all the power, all the money, all the evidence, all the documents. And so now, yes, my point is, it's up to the employer. You better be able to prove it, whether it's true or not. You better prove it. So that's a great question. Wonderful question. That's some good stuff. I hope y'all paying attention because I think a lot of times we think we know about harassment and hostile work environment, and then sometimes we just throw the word out and throw the words around. Oh, you harassing me, oh, hostile work environment. But there are certain things you have to be really specific. And what does it look like? How do you prove it? What did the organization do to prevent it? What policies were in place? What trainings were in place? Was there an NDA? What did the NDA say? Right? Did you have a contract? Are you a contractor or are you an employee? Even though it may not matter, you still cannot by law harass anyone. But all those factors are taken into consideration, and all those factors will be taken into consideration with P. Diddy's case. So they're looking at everything, all the claims, where it happened, when it happened, how it happened, and what was P. Diddy's stance in terms of, as an employer. That's why a lot of times you can't have certain CEOs and leaders having certain people report to them because it can create a conflict of interest. So the bottom line is if you have certain people report to you, you in some way control their livelihood. And so if he's the CEO and he has all of these people reporting to him, then one of the things that can happen is fear of retaliation. I hear that all the time where employees are like, I need my job. And if I say something, even though I have rights under the law to say something, what if they retaliate against me? What if there's retaliation? And honestly, you cannot prevent retaliation. Sometimes it's so insidious. It's so filled with, things happening behind the scenes. It's really difficult. So the number one thing an employer can do is focus on performance. And what an employee can do is know their rights. I just want to be really clear. A lot of times I had someone say to me, it's very rare that we see HR people be an employee advocate. I am for 100%. I want you to hear me loud and clear. I am an employee advocate. I am also an employer advocate because I want employers to stay in business because we need to be employed. We need them to be successful. We don't want every organization to be sued because we need to work. We need money. I personally am a consultant, but I believe that, people need a place to go and have a job. And so I just want employers to be the best employers they can be to employees so that they won't get sued, so they can protect themselves. And then, so if an employee has a complaint, I always say that's an opportunity. Instead of employers, the ones listening right now, if you feel like, oh, she's just down for the employee and she's always trying to help an employee sue an employer, ask yourself, what would an employee sue you for? So you should be using this as an opportunity to fill in the gaps, check, go through your handbook, go through your practices, and make sure an employee doesn't have a reason to sue you, that you're not creating a hostile work environment, that you're not creating a pattern of discrimination or harassment. This is an opportunity for you, employers. So when an employee shouts out, oh my goodness, somebody's shaking my chair and someone is drugging my drinks or whatever, you need to say thank you. I needed to know, and now I'm going to fix it so this won't happen to any other employees and I can keep my company. So I just want to be really clear because a lot of times people are like, oh, you're more on the employee side or you're more on the employer side. I'm on the human side. I'm a human resource person. I help humans be the best humans they can be. And humans are employers and employees. And so it's not about one or the other, but typically employers are the people in power. And so employees are afraid to even speak up. And so a lot of times I do have to be an advocate for the employee because they don't have any other advocates. Employers know their place, they know the law a lot of the time. Sometimes they don't. And so they don't really need as much of an advocate. So I just wanted to be super clear on this very first Ask Mrs. HR podcast episode that you understand who I am, my stance, and why I do what I do. I have to say, I'm not a lawyer. One more time, for the record, I'm going to say that a lot on these podcasts because I'm not an attorney, and this should not be taken for legal advice. However, I recall years ago, won't say any names again, I was in a situation where I was potentially going to sue an organization. And one of the things that came up, because there were a few other people who went through the same experience, was this class action lawsuit. My personal experience as an HR person, it is really difficult to pull together a class action lawsuit. You would have to get everyone together. And I don't, really know enough about how to organize a class action lawsuit. But the bottom line is, yes, there is a potential in that situation to have a class action lawsuit. And if you're a larger organization with multiple employees, yes, you will be at risk for a class action lawsuit. So I don't have all the details around a class action lawsuit. I think the best advice is to avoid one lawsuit, avoid one person. In my experience, if you can address complaint head on with the one person, you can address and avoid a class action lawsuit. So don't let enough people experience this pattern of misbehavior, this pattern of poor behavior, so that you got 500 people having the same complaint. Just like I just mentioned, a complaint is a blessing. Take that complaint, deal with the complaint, take it serious, which by law you're supposed to be, very quick to and urgent to file when someone files a complaint to make sure you address it. If you do that and there's one situation that comes up, treat that one situation as if it's a class action lawsuit instead of, gaslighting the person, letting the situation blow over. And then there'll be absolutely no ability to have a class action lawsuit because there won't be enough people. The good thing about sexual harassment claims, and it's in the law, is that it has to be a pattern of behavior that is persistent. And so if no one has come to you with a complaint and you only know of one complaint, then most likely you're not going to have a class action lawsuit. Courts have been really favorable to employers who do something. They may not know, they may have said the wrong thing, they may have said something stupid, they may have done something stupid, may have called people the N word, the B word, the C. Like they could have done anything. But if they are quick to fix it and recognize that mistake, courts are typically very amiable, very kind to the employer who wants to do the right thing. Because again, this country is built on business. We need to keep businesses running. We're not trying to, this country is not trying to shut down businesses. Okay, you might get a fine, but we need to keep people employed to keep this country running. And I know that sounds very simplistic, but that is the deal. When you go into court, a lot of times the judge just wants to keep the business running. So I'm saying that to you employers, that you have an opportunity to avoid class action lawsuits by dealing with the one complaint in a serious manner. So I'm really excited about my very first podcast. This is going to be an amazing next 12 months. I plan on doing this twice a month. So catch me on the first week of the month and the third week of the month. is the Ask Mrs. HR podcast. You can also reach me on Instagram at Ask Mrs. HR. And follow me. We have Mrs. HR in a Box product just launched. Please check that out at Mrs. HR in a box.com. That's my do-it-yourself HR digital product. For people who have all of these questions, you can kind of do it yourself based on this new product that I have that's going to be available in an app. So lots of great tools coming up from Mrs. HR, Ask Mrs. HR. And don't forget my book, The Diversity Dilemma, which really talks about how can we focus on equity? How can we really, really make a change based on all the different things we're seeing happening in our environment? And it is a survival guide for you in terms of HR and equity. So thank you so much for just being here. If you're listening, I am grateful for you. And my name is Dr. Thelá Thatch, and this is the Ask This is HR podcast.